Good morning. Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. A little gray morning, but it's always time to learn something new or maybe go deeper into something that you already do. And so that's why we're here today, to hear Kelly about Google Analytics and how to get better tools for your own management on your data, on your website or whatever. So this is like almost one of the last events we're going to have here in these 2 weeks of the Expert Summit. So we're really happy to see the full house. We hope you enjoy. And if you need later the content, it will be recorded in our channel. So you can always come back to check anything or to share with someone else. Thank you so much for being patient with us with the line and with all the registering. We're getting better at that, but we know we still have some way to go. So that's why we always ask feedback for you after the session. So leave your comments, your suggestions for us to get better on everything from the content to the organization. And of course, if you want to compliment us in something that we did good, we're here for that too. So let's hear Kelly. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy, guys.
Thanks, Fernanda. Oi, gente, tudo bem? Meu nome é Kelly, e como eu falei no slide, eu estudei no Rio, então tenho sotaque carioca. Is anyone here from Rio? All right, those are my people. So I live in Chicago, Illinois. I started in Mountain View with Google and moved back to Chicago where my family's from a couple years ago. And I work on Google Analytics 360, which is the paid version of Google Analytics. So someday, you guys, maybe you'll be my clients. You grow enough, you have enough needs, we can get you that. And I used to work on the AdWords support team, so I've also done a lot of reactive support, a lot of small and medium businesses, and worked with a lot of startups, so I'm hoping that this content here will be useful for you guys. So some tips before we get started. Number one, don't be afraid, like this cat. Everything that we talk about today will be relevant regardless of which measurement product you use. So I've framed it as a Google Analytics talk, but you can apply a lot of these concepts to other products, although I won't name them because I don't know about them, so I don't want you to ask me about them. And keep your measurement challenges in mind because it will be great to have examples from you or questions from you. We ran the same content yesterday in more of a classroom setting and got a lot of live questions as we were going. That'll be a little bit harder in a big auditorium, but at the end we'll have time for questions, and I'm happy to tackle any of your specific challenges. You'd be surprised with how your specific challenge is easily translated into someone else's challenge. So this is our agenda for the day. Before we dive into it, can I get hands raised for who is already using Google Analytics? Awesome. Okay, so almost everyone. Can I get hands raised for people that have logged in to Google Analytics? Okay, we're looking at about half. How about people who know what they're doing inside of Google Analytics? Okay, we're down to about a fourth. Okay, that's good. That's helpful for me, so I know how to tailor the content to you guys, and I know how technical and how much to explain. So for those of you that are more expert than I am, just bear with me while I explain the simple concepts. So we're going to start with measurement planning. Measurement planning is going to underlie the foundation of everything we talk about today. I actually had a lot more content on measurement planning yesterday, and I cut it down because I think it's the same concepts that you guys are used to. It's basically the same thing as OKRs. Can anyone tell me what this is a picture of? You can shout it out. It's the cart before the horse. So it doesn't make sense to start implementing, to start making changes in Google Analytics. You're putting the cart before the horse. The horse is your measurement plan. The cart is the way that you're tracking the metrics that you're tracking, okay? So the measurement plan is the horse. We're going to talk about the measurement plan. It's the same thing as OKRs when you boil down to it. And I know that you guys have been working on your OKRs. I know that this is something that Google has shared with the world, although I don't even know if we created it. Basically what you're doing is you're defining your business objectives, what it is that maybe one of your goals as a business. In this example, it's just to grow the business, obviously. That's a pretty simple goal. From there, you're measuring certain particular key performance indicators, or KPIs, or as we say in OKRs, key results. So in this example, we are talking about the user base and about revenue from online sales. Then, as the third step, you're talking about metrics. There's a reason that metrics is the third step. It is more important. You're going to need metrics eventually. You have to have metrics. But you need to know what you're trying to measure, what questions you're trying to answer, what problem you're trying to solve before you start measuring and reporting. Final two is targets. It's good to have an idea of what you're trying to do with your tracking so you know what was a success and what was a failure, or what could be improved. And then finally, segments. Not all of your traffic will behave in the same way. Not all of your users are the same. And so being really mindful of how users are different and how you can segment users will be really powerful for your later analysis. All right? That's all we're going to talk about for measurement planning, but I'm going to keep underlying those same tenets as we go through. So let's jump into Google Analytics. I call it 101, but this is probably like 202. First of all, structure. Within Google Analytics, there's three pieces, I'll call them. They're kind of nested into each other, as you see in that graphic. We've got account, property, and view. The reason I'm giving you all, this is basically going to be a bunch of definitions, and the reason I'm giving you these definitions is so that when we later talk about how to solve your specific challenges, you'll know the words that I'm talking about, okay? So an account, honestly, I don't know why they exist. They're really just a container for user permissions and a couple settings. They're honestly not that important. The property, however, is extremely important. The property is what tracks your data. So where you have a tracking code, it's a UA number, is what we sometimes call it, and you put that tracking code on your website or your app. That means that the property will include all of the data from wherever you put that property's code, that UA number. So if you put it on 4 different websites, your property will include all the data from all 4 websites. If you put it on one website, it will include all the data from one website. If you put it on just one page of your website, it will only include data from that one page. So the question I get a lot is, what should I do? How should I structure my account? My best recommendation is to use a single property for a single domain, including all of its subdomains. And then most people tag their app and their web properties or their app and the web in separate properties. It's not impossible to put it together. There's just some funky stuff that goes on with it. So most people keep it separate. Do I have any questions on that? Can we get a shake our head that we understand it? Awesome. So with the view, this is your portal into the data. And it's where you actually see your information. My recommendation is to always keep one view unfiltered, because almost never will you get the filter right the first time. And I'll explain what a filter is in a minute. But filters are permanent. They can irreparably ruin your data. So I recommend a test view to test your filters, and a master view. Once you know that the filter works, you can put it onto your master view where you're actually doing your analysis. Everybody should have at least 3. A lot of people have more for their specific reporting needs. Okay, we're going to go into some terms, and I'm going to run through them as quickly as I can. A hit is the interaction that a user has with your site as it is passed into Google Analytics. So it's literally a URL that's sent to the Google Analytics servers, and it has a bunch of parameters with little pieces of information, like the page you were on, the browser you're using, the host name, your screen resolution, the time. All of that information goes into the analytics servers, and it's processed to give you all of the information you see in the analytics interface. So everything boils down to the hits that you sent. The hits are sent automatically with the page view tag that we give you, and I'll talk more about what's automatic and what's not a little bit later. A session is a period of user activity. If you have 30 minutes of inactivity, so we have a hit, we have 30 minutes, and then we have another hit, those are going to be 2 sessions. Or if the source values change. So we're going to talk about attribution as well. And then finally, users. This is one that comes up a lot because users is based on what we call a client ID, which is stored in the browser or in your app's data. It's the application ID, or the advertiser ID, excuse me. So if you clear the cache in your browser and you go back to the website, you're a new user. If you visit from a new browser, you're on the same computer, you're a new user. If you clear out all the data from the app and start over, you get new IDs, so you're a new user. The reason I give you that level of detail is so when you're thinking about measuring your own success with some of these built-in metrics that we give you, you need to be aware of how they count and what they can and cannot tell you. This can tell you the number of browsers that have visited your website. It cannot tell you with confidence the number of actual human beings that have visited your website, because that's not how it tracks. It's not embedding a chip in someone's brain that tracks them uniquely. However, we will talk about how to get closer to tracking humans instead of browsers. Some terminology from GA. We've got a metric, which is a numerical value, and we've got a dimension, which is a qualitative value. Google Analytics populates a lot of these automatically. And then, if it doesn't, we've got custom metrics and custom dimensions. So let's say there's something that you're trying to understand about a user, and you know it on the back end. So on your website, you know that they are a high-value user because they've logged in or something like that. You don't know where to put that information, but you want it in Google Analytics. You can put it into a custom dimension. Or if you want to keep an eye on certain value of, I don't know, signups, and it's not incremented automatically. That's a bad example. We can do it other ways. But if you have a numerical value you're trying to track that doesn't happen automatically, you can increment a metric, a custom metric. And when I say increment, I mean go up by 1. So you can take it from 0 to 1, 1 to 2. You can count. Simple. When I talk about implementation, there's kind of 2 pieces of implementation. One of them is the code piece. So you're putting new code onto your site, whether it's the basic page view tracking code, or if you're talking about event tracking, e-commerce tracking, sending custom dimensions and metrics, that's often extra code that you're going to put onto your site or into your GTM container. But a lot of problems that people have with the integrity of their data or the cleanliness of their data, so many of them can be fixed with configurations, which are things that you do in the Google Analytics interface to modify the way that the data is processed by Google Analytics. Before I go any further, can I get some head nods that this is making sense or not making sense? OK, awesome. All right. So the last 3 slides here on the GA 101, what I'm doing here is I'm showing you 2 things that confuse people, 2 things that people get, they mix up, and they're not quite sure what the difference is. So one of the most common questions I get is, what is the difference between a goal and an event? An event, as we mentioned in this slide, is implementation. It's a piece of code that you put on your site that tracks some user activity, like a video play, a button click. You can even do scroll tracking. If you're a publisher and you want to figure out, did they get all the way to the bottom of the page, you can fire an event at halfway at the bottom. And now you know that they got all the way down to the bottom of the page. That kind of information is not passed into Google Analytics automatically. A goal, as you see here, oops, there we go, is configured, it's configuration. It's configured in Google Analytics in the admin section, and it will match out to something else like a page URL or the event that you fired. So what I often find with goals is people are confused about them because you can fire an event, and that just populates a regular event in Google Analytics. You can also turn that event into a goal. The value of having goals is that they can be imported back into AdWords. You can look at them under different attribution models. So most people, with their key events, the thing that is really important to them, they turn it into a goal. For the things they simply want to understand, they don't need to use it for a bid strategy. They don't really care about attribution of where that person came from. They keep it as an event exclusively. Filter and a segment. another common thing that people get confused with. A filter is at the view level. And as I mentioned, the view is your portal to the data, and you should always keep one unfiltered. At the view level, you can include certain data or exclude certain data. So let's say you wanted to exclude all of your internal IP addresses because it doesn't make sense to measure your own success, including all of the traffic that you send to your own website. That's one thing that people do. So in their master view, they'll exclude all their internal IP addresses. A segment is one of the most powerful things that Google Analytics offers you that you absolutely should be leveraging if you are not already. We talked about in the measurement plan, at the bottom, I know it's at the bottom, but it's actually one of the most important things, to segment your traffic, to segment your results, and find patterns. So it's all good and well to talk about how do we get this information into Google Analytics, and that is the point of this talk. But your segments are massively important for your analysis of whether you were good or bad at the thing you tried to do. So a segment will include or exclude a session or a user based on certain criteria. So in this example, I've included all the sessions that had the event label video play. So I had to first set up the event, which is an implementation thing. Now I can set up the segment that shows me everyone who interacted with that event. That's really powerful. If I want to analyze how effective is that video at getting someone to do something later, I need to divide my users between the ones that interacted with the video and the ones that didn't see it at all. Otherwise, I'm not getting a clear picture of how it might be influencing my later goal. Is this making sense? Okay. Quick talk on attribution. When I say attribution, I mean the source, the medium, the campaign, the keyword, and the ad that a session came from. So if I click on an AdWords ad and I land on your website, my source medium is likely Google CPC. There are some source mediums that do not get tracked automatically. The most common ones are your direct emails that you send to people, Facebook ads, and then other search engines that I won't name. But here's an example of what a UTM tag looks like, or I should say, what a URL with UTM tags looks like, and a screenshot from the tool that we have. You can Google it. It's the UTM Builder to help you build this URL. So what I did in the Builder is I put in my website, I put in the source, medium, and campaign name that I want this traffic to be categorized as, and then it spits out this URL for you. It's not hard. You guys are all techie. You could probably recreate that in a spreadsheet and have a process around it to make sure that the data is tagged correctly. Or I'm sorry, that the URLs are tagged correctly. And that's something we'll talk about as one of the examples. But I just want you to know what UTM tags are. They're a way of forcing attribution information into Google Analytics, particularly when it's not available automatically. Which brings us to this question, which is why Cristiano is so angsty. Well, what the hell does Google Analytics track automatically? How do I know what I need to put extra if I don't know what they already have? That is an excellent question, and one that I wish that we would help you answer. Unfortunately, there's no one place to confirm exactly what GA does by default, okay? However, I have some guiding principles for you. My first recommendation is if you've already put the default tracking code, the chunk of code that we give you, if you've put that on your pages and you go and look at your account, you can assume that everything there is already done automatically, okay? I know that's kind of a weird way of doing it, so some best practices. Page and screen data from your app or your website or your app will come in automatically. So the name of the page, we'll calculate the time spent on page, and we send those page view hits every time the page loads. So what does that mean? If the page is not reloading, whatever's happening is not being tracked. That's my best recommendation for you. So if a user is doing something on your page, and the URL is not changing, the page is not reloading, you can assume that what they're doing is not being tracked in Google Analytics. So if you care about what they're doing, you need to track it. You should also assume that any custom information you have about people, like you think that this person's high value, this person's low value, this person is a brand new account versus this person is recreating an old account, that kind of user information we don't know it already. You can tell it to us, but we don't know how you segment your users, so you can assume that that's not in there either. So what do I do when it's not there automatically? What do I do? It's a really good question. Let's implement it. Let's get it in there if we can. So what we're going to talk about here is 2 approaches to implementation. Has anyone seen the show South Park? Can I get a raise of hands? Has anyone seen this episode of South Park? Okay, so there's underwear gnomes that are stealing underwear. And they ask them, what are you stealing the underwear for? And they're like, well, step 1, we steal the underwear. Step 2, step 3, profit. So step 2 is always the hardest step. This is probably true in your business as a whole. You're like, okay, I know what my problem is. Profit. So what we're going to talk about mostly is step 2. We're trying to figure out how to get information into Google Analytics, okay? So step 1, what we're talking about here is I'll call it the bottom up, which means let's say that you are brand new to Google Analytics. You have very little tracking. I should say, you have very little extra tracking. You've got the default tag on all your pages, but you've got nothing extra. We're going to call that the bottom up. So we're going to start in a good place. We know we have some gaps, and we're going to try and fill them in advance before they become a problem. Okay, that's bottom up. It is still a hard thing to do. So we know that some data is missing, like the user interaction on the page, as I mentioned, or some key piece of information about a user that GA doesn't know automatically. We know it's missing. Now we have to figure out the right way of getting it into Google Analytics so that we can use it later. Okay? Notice that step 2 and step 3, people tend to kind of think of this as one step, or they flip it around. They're like, oh, well, I know what's missing, so I'm just going to put some code on my page. That's fine, but it's not elegant. You're going to end up having to go through the top-down approach that I talk about next to fix it if you don't think about it in advance. So let me give you an example. Or actually, before I give you an example, one of the principles that I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about this is one of these McKinsey consultant principles, which is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. What I mean by that is when you're deciding what to put, how to tag, and what values to send into Google Analytics, don't leave room for confusion. Don't tag 2 separate things with the same values. That gets you nowhere. You've got it in GA, but now you can't tell the difference between it. And as much as you can, tag as much as you can. So exhaust everything you can, but also make sure that you can get the granularity out of the data that you later need. So here's an example of an event tracking implementation plan. Let's say that I want to know how users are interacting with my video. So I want to know when they start it and when they end it, let's say. I've determined that I think that interacting with the video is a good measure of site engagement and customer loyalty, which is why this is important to me. So in my measurement plan, my hypothesis is that video engagement is a good metric for user engagement. And now I need to track that in a way that gives me the details I need. So sure, I could just send in 2 events for starting and finishing. If I didn't have the label row right there, let's imagine this label row is gone. What do we think would happen when I go to analyze how people are starting and finishing the video? And let's say my CEO is like, well, what's the difference between the videos? Would I be able to answer that question if the label row was not there? No, because I made no attempt to keep them mutually exclusive, to put some information in there that allows me to get that granular. So what I've done here is I can easily analyze how many events happened for all videos by just looking at the category equals video. I can also easily analyze all video plays and all video finishes by just looking at category video, action, play, or finish. But if I want to look at each video individually, if that's an important segment to do, a way of slicing the data, I need to put that information in, and it would likely go into the label. As an aside, an event, I should have said this at the beginning, an event has 4 attributes: event category, event action, event label, and event value. Most of the time, you don't pass in a value. You can. If there's a monetary value associated with something that's happening, you could. But this is what the best way I can use to describe your planning for the tracking you're going to do is elegance. You're trying to get elegant with what you're sending into Google Analytics to make the later analysis as easy as possible. So here we're going to switch approaches. Let's say you've got some data in Google Analytics, and you know that there are probably things that you need to fix. You need to clean it a little bit. That's what I call the top-down approach. You're going to look at the data in GA and find the problems. This is going to be an iterative process. Actually, all of this is an iterative process. You're going to go through this over and over until you get it as good as you can get it. There's no way of getting it right the very first time, especially since your values and your business objectives are going to change over time. You're going to be going through this frequently. So we're going to look at what's wrong with GA in the data, or what we could improve to make our analysis easier, and then we're going to make changes based on that. So here we have a screenshot. This is the Google Analytics interface. We are in the acquisition report under source medium, okay? And we see this. And here's a bigger screenshot of it. Sorry if it's blurry. Can anyone tell me if there's something wrong here? What was that? The same information. It's the same information, okay. Do we know, if I'm an analyst and I'm going into Google Analytics, do I know, right off the bat, the difference between Facebook ads and Facebook advertising? No. Do I know if I need to pay attention to them, or if I can just look at one, or if I need to group them together? No. You've made me ask a lot of questions. You've made it hard for me to find the answer to the question of how successful are my Facebook ads. The reason I bring this up is as you guys scale, and I've seen this with a lot of big companies, you have people in various departments that are running various campaigns to drive user engagement, et cetera. You don't have the time to teach all of them how to use Google Analytics in the right way for your business. You don't have the time to explain to them that, oh, Facebook ads and Facebook advertising is actually the same thing, so you can keep it all together if you want to. You shouldn't have to do that to them. That's not scalable. Instead, you should fix the problem at the source. You should keep track of how you're tagging your campaigns and make it, again, as elegant as possible. Don't leave room for interpretation. In this example, we've tagged the medium of all of our Facebook campaigns with the same thing, the same source, the same medium, and the only thing that's different is the campaign name. Same thing with our direct email campaigns. We've got our source and our medium, whatever we want it to be, and then the name of the campaign at the bottom. We're not breeding confusion by having different medium values or different source values for what is, in fact, the same thing. So this is something that you probably can do pretty easily right now, and as you get bigger and bigger and you've got teams running campaigns, engaging with your users, you're probably going to want, I hate the word, you're probably going to want to put a process in to make sure that they keep track of how they're tagging and that it kind of aligns with how you generally tag your UTMs so that your analysis is later as easy as possible. Another example, here we are in the Pages report, and we're under Behavior, all page, Site Content, all pages, and we're looking at these myaccount.html pages. Again, sorry that it's blurry. Can anyone tell me if something is wrong here, and if so, what do you think is wrong? What's that? Someone is logged in. Yeah, I mean, it's likely the case that because they're on the My Account page that they're logged in. Right. So definitely. So would it be easier to just not have that parameter, the question mark mode equals? Well, that's a good question. There's no answer of whether this is right or wrong. It all depends on what you're trying to solve and who is trying to solve it and how good they are at Google Analytics. So if your question is, how do I get all of the page views for the My Account pages, and you don't care what part of the My Account section they're in, it might be prohibitive to have all of these mode equals, mode equals, mode equals. It might be hindering the analysis. Or, if you want that information, is the URL the best place to have it? You can create a filter to pull the mode out of the URL and put it into a custom dimension. That way you still have it, but then you get the best of both worlds. You have only one page that is myaccount.html, and then in this custom dimension, you have these values of view order detail, billing address, etc. The other thing, the reason I bring this specific example up, I know it's kind of a weak example. The reason I bring it up is twofold. One, so you know that you need to be critical of your original impression of data. Think about someone else's perspective and what questions you're trying to solve and how much they know about GA before you start making changes. And the second is, I forgot it. I remembered it. The second is that the Pages report in Google Analytics has this fun limit that we call cardinality. This is just a pro tip for you guys since we're on this topic. Has anyone ever seen an other row in their Pages report? There's one row that just says other, and you're like, well, what the hell is that? Yeah? Okay. The reason that that happens is what we call cardinality. It simply means that there's a lot of values for page. You've got a ton of rows for page. And it's too many, basically. You've hit our limit. So we're going to take a bunch of them and just collapse them into one row called other. And it's going to be really hard for you to figure out what pages are in that other row. One of the most common reasons people see that other row is because of these query parameters. Because in actuality, this is one page, and it could or should be one row, but you've made it 8 rows. If you've got so many unique combinations of query parameters on your URLs that you're getting into millions of rows of pages or millions of rows of custom dimensions, you're probably going to start seeing that other row. So the way to fix it is to get it out of the pages, the page value, and either get rid of it entirely because you don't care about it for your analysis, or put it into a custom dimension, which you can do with the filter, a search and replace filter. Everyone with me? Okay. We're going to go into some common questions. As an aside, this case study, I'm happy to go through it if we have the time, but I would honestly prefer live questions. So if we have a ton of time, I'll walk you through it as an example, but otherwise we can just go to live questions. So common questions. I'm hoping that this will cover a lot of the questions that you guys have bubbling in your brains right now. So again, we're back to this point of, what if that data point that I need isn't tracked in GA automatically? What do I do, right? So it depends on what you're trying to track, obviously. It depends on your goals. So here's one. My conversion funnel happens online, but I need more granular details. So I know that someone's going through this funnel, but I don't know where they're coming, how many they're hitting, and where they're dropping off. I don't know any of that because I don't have indicators of how far they've gotten. How many of you have a single-page app or a single-page checkout? No one? Okay, that's fair. The main reason, or in your app if it doesn't refresh the screen. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, we fire page view or screen view hits from your web or the website or your app when you reload the page. So if that's not happening, you're not capturing that information. So let's say you want to figure out all of the steps of your checkout funnel. You might consider implementing an event for every step so that you can later see how many of this event did I have, how many of this event did I have, how many of this event did I have. And you can get an idea of where people are falling off. The same is true, similar is true for this problem. My conversion isn't tracked online, or it happens a few days later, so it doesn't happen right away. I know that some of you have had this problem because I've gotten this question 3 times so far. And this is a serious problem for sure. How do you measure your success if you have no indicator in Google Analytics of what is success? We know that a goal is a measure of success, but how do you set up a goal if it's not even on the website, right? You have 2 options here, and I'd strongly consider the first one before you go to the second one. The first one is to stop letting it happen offline. You are hurting yourself by letting it happen offline. I understand that there's a lot of times where you think that that's the best for the user experience, and I get that. You are, however, hurting your own ability to measure your success and ultimately to grow in a informed way if you're letting it happen offline. So one example that we had was that they go through this process, and then there's like a series of emails that are sent out that just say like, hey, it worked. How about instead of saying, hey, it worked, you say, hey, come back to your account and accept the terms. You force them to come back to the website, so now you can send a page view, you can send an event that says, this is a success. They signed up for the thing I wanted them to sign up for. They bought the thing I wanted them to buy. If that is not an option for you, or if you've run an experiment to see if that helps or hurts, which is what I would recommend doing, force them back and see if it changes your overall completion rates on your back end. Then you consider what we call the measurement protocol. So as I mentioned at the beginning, all Google Analytics data is populated by hits, right? Hits have all these parameters. They're structured in a certain way, and you send them into the Google Analytics server, and it's processed. Well, you can just copy a hit. You can just make your own. You don't have to let our tracking code make it for you. So you can write, for example, you can write your own API that says, oh, we found out that this was a successful transaction. We are going to construct a Google Analytics hit with these parameters, and then send it into Google Analytics. You can send an event, or you could send a transaction if you have like a monetary amount associated with it, or if you care that it never mind. Anyway, you can send an event or a transaction. Those are the 2 that I'd recommend to populate the information in Google Analytics. Does this make sense? Okay. I need to add more qualitative information about my users to match it back to my database or to make my analysis better. So we talked about segments, right? It might be easy to build a segment or to have one of the existing segments of, hey, people who looked at this video because I have an event there. But what if you want to see people who I consider high value? You have to let Google Analytics know who's high value first. Then you can build a segment for those users that are high value. The way that you pass this information in is through a custom dimension. This is a super easy one. We talked about it before. You can certainly pass it into any of the existing Google Analytics dimensions. Like, you could change the page URL to include high value if you wanted to. You're getting it into Google Analytics somehow, that's fine. But that makes it harder to analyze. You're like, oh, I have to look at the page dimension in order to figure out if it was high value. Well, what if someone looked at 10 pages? Is high value on all the pages, or is it just on the first page? You're begging a lot of questions. So in a situation where there's something unique to your business that you're trying to track, send it into a custom dimension. Super common one. I'm sure everyone has this question. Well, Kelly, before you said that the user metric in Google Analytics is actually browsers or apps like devices. How do I get a user across all their devices? That's actually more valuable. And we would agree with you. But we are not making that easy for you. We are trying, is the first thing I will say. We are trying to get access to signed in user data in order to make the user calculation more accurate of how users act across across their devices. And by signed in, I mean Google signed in. That has a lot of privacy implications. That has a lot of different products that would be affected by it. So as you can imagine, it's definitely a long process, but it's definitely a goal. In the meantime, the solution that we have for you is called user ID. What you do is when someone logs into your site, you set a user ID for them. It's a non-identifying number, basically. When you set it, you're going to set it for that user on every hit for every device after they log in. That way, Google Analytics is like, oh, cool, this is the same user across all these devices. I will mention 2 caveats to that. Number 1, the user ID is only used to calculate the user metric if the view is enabled for user ID. So if you're looking at a regular view, just a regular view, your master view, it's all your data, it is still going to use the client ID. Even if your code sends the user ID, it still uses client ID to count users. In a user ID enabled view, you've got an extra view that you've created just for this cross-device measurement. It is using user ID to count users, but it's only including the people who have a user ID. So it's always going to be a subset of all your users. It will probably be the percentage of people that sign into your site. If you have a really low sign-in rate, you're probably going to have very little traffic in your user ID enabled view. If you have a lot of people signing in, your user ID enabled view is going to be a very good representation of how all users behave because it has a lot of data in there from all of your signed in users. So this begs the question, if I want more information on cross-device and I can only get it when they log in, what should I maybe experiment with? Any ideas? What's that? A login flow, forcing them to log in or improving the login flow. This is how data can help drive experimentation. And I've kind of touched on that a lot. You could test XYZ thing to see if it improves your overall measurement and your overall user experience. So if I maybe run a test where I have 50% of people are not forced to log in, they're not forced to do anything, they have the regular experience, and 50% are forced to log in, and I want to see, do they still convert at the same rate? Do they still stay on the page for as long? Do they come back as frequently? That will help me decide if it makes sense to force people to log in, which will help, and if it does make sense because it's not hurting me in other ways, now you've improved, you've made your data more robust in Google Analytics. You've helped solve this own problem for yourself. So those were the examples that I have. And this link, I'm going to make this deck available. This link just leads you to let me Google that for you. Where can I find more? There are a lot of resources on measurement planning, as well as how to implement changes to get you the data point that you need for your metrics and your segments. Okay? So I recommend, we have what are called Google Analytics certified partners, and they love to blog. They blog all the time. They love to answer questions that you guys have, or some of the questions that they've answered could be related to your question. So it's worth doing some research and trying to figure out, is there a solution for this? How are other people solving this problem? And then test it out yourself. For the developers in the room, I would also recommend, I got this question yesterday on how to QA. My recommendation is to, if you have a QA instance of your site or your app, have that in a separate GA property. Make all of your changes, all of your implementation changes there first, and make sure that they look like you want them to look in Google Analytics. Then roll those changes out to your production site to actually influence your production site's data. So that was the extent of what I was going to cover. We're at 43 minutes. If you want, I can go through a quick case study that I put together. It's not even a real case study. It's just an example. It'll take about 5 minutes. If you would prefer, I can just start answering questions. Can I get a raised hands for case study? All right, we're doing it. So, Google Merchandise Store site redesign. This is their business plan. They want to drive revenue in the merchandise store. Overall, they want revenue growth, right? Their KPI is online sales. And they're going to measure that by e-commerce conversion rate and average order value, okay? And they have a goal of increasing it by some outrageous percent that the CEO sent down to them that is physically impossible to create. But what they're going to do is they're going to experiment. One of their hypotheses is that the site design is not good, and they're going to make some changes to try and improve revenue. And if it's successful, they can roll those changes out and help meet their target overall, okay? So with their redesign, they need to know who visited the redesign page and who visited the original page, or the original version, I should say. So first they're like, okay, what do we need in GA before we go any further? Well, they need to lowercase that H in the word they. Come on, nobody got my joke. So they need e-commerce tracking, okay? So the metrics that they're using to measure success are not there automatically. They have to implement e-commerce tracking in their code. They also need some signal that tells them whether a user saw the redesigned page or the original page. Because by default, Google Analytics is not just going to be like, hey, we think you're running an experiment with one of our competitors. We're just going to go ahead and put that information in there for you so it's easier for you to see value of that competitor. No. What they're going to do is they have decided that the signal they're going to use is the landing page value. If someone lands on a page that has the word redesign in it, that session is considered a redesign session. If someone lands on a page that does not have the word redesign in it, that session is just a regular original group session, okay? So they're going to create their segments for visited and did not visit redesign. Here we have visited redesign. Notice that I've named the segment what it actually is. Highly recommend doing that so you don't get confused about what is the segment actually doing. I have included the sessions where the landing page contains redesign, okay? That contains dropdown in the center. You can change it to a whole bunch of stuff. You can write a regex. You can do does not contain, does not begin with, begins with, ends with. You've got all kinds of operators there to make it easier for you. And the landing page dropdown that you see, you can pick basically any dimension or metric. So if I wanted to look at the people who visited this landing page and also purchased, I could click that and button and add another rule for transactions greater than or equal to 1. I've now segmented not just the people who saw the redesign, but also the ones that purchased. So I can go even deeper into my users. We're going to build the opposite segment for the people who did not visit the redesign. The reason I use this example, it's a very easy example, and I know it's more about experimentation than it is about just one tracking need. But the reason I use this example is to highlight that with your analysis, it doesn't make sense to compare visitors who saw the redesign to all visitors. Because the people in all visitors are also the people who saw the redesign. They're not complementary. They are not mutually exclusive. And so you're not going to be able to gain insights comparing if they're not mutually exclusive. If your goal is just to compare this to all traffic, we need to talk about your goals. Because that doesn't make a ton of sense. Okay, so we've got visited and did not visit the redesign. Now we're going to overlay those segments onto the report. Do I have a pointer? Wow, I should have realized that earlier. Okay, so we're in the e-commerce tracking report. We're over here, conversions, e-commerce overview, okay? Up at the top, this is where you put your segments. By default, every time you log in, there's going to be an all users segment at the top. It'll be blue. Okay? I took it off because I don't care about all users. This is all users, but it's just they're divided. Okay? So now in blue, I've got those who visited the redesign, and in orange, I've got those who did not visit the redesign. Okay, if I were to just look at revenue and transactions, what am I assuming? If I'm just comparing those two numbers, what assumption have I made? What's that? Well, that the design sucks, the redesign sucks, right? But, yeah?
You're assuming that those numbers are comparable, but really they're not.
That is correct. If you notice up at the top, almost 65% of all sessions are in the did not visit redesign, and 35 are in the visited redesign. I didn't split my traffic evenly, which is fine. But that means I can't compare totals, because twice as much traffic went into the did not visit redesign. So it's not fair to say that without the redesign, you can get 2 times the conversion rate, because that's not true. Without the redesign, you can get 0.4 or something, math that I can't do fast, the conversion rate higher. So keep in mind when you do your analysis and you've got your metrics, there was a reason I chose averages in the beginning, because I had no intention of splitting it evenly. If I split the traffic evenly, and I've controlled that it's 50-50, then you can look at totals, because you've already taken out the denominator as a variable. Okay? Same with average order value. I found here that I have a slightly higher conversion rate, but each time they convert, they make me way more money. So I might want to dive deeper into that segment and figure out, well, was it just a one-off, like an outlier where they bought $10,000 worth of stuff because it was some Googler just going to like a sales conference in Sao Paulo? Or is that like an actual client, and in general, this average is representative of how much people are spending if the design is this way? So that is actually the end. And I moved the thanks slide to the earlier, so I don't have it here. However, to recap, overall, we talked about so much. So I'm just going to give a quick recap, and then I'm going to take questions. So measurement plan, we're going to define our objectives. We're going to set key performance indicators for whether that objective is being met or not. We've got targets and a metric that we think is representative of that KPI. That's a really hard thing to do right there, to find a metric that's representative. You won't always be able to find a good metric that's representative. Let's assume that we have, as best as we can, we found that metric. Now we care about the segments of people that are interacting with this page or this funnel or this experiment or whatever it is that you're doing, or the website in general. We're going to try and figure out data points from within each of those segments to see if they're different. Or are all users really the same? We will track the things that we don't have in the way that we think is best. And that is subjective. That's going to take time. I might have one suggestion for how to do something. You might come up with another way of doing it. And ultimately, it gets the data into Google Analytics in a way that makes sense for you. And you may have to go over and do it again. We're also going to analyze, audit, take a look at our Google Analytics data to make sure that it's as clean as it can possibly be, so that all of our users, when we go to scale our business, have an easier time analyzing and measuring their own success, and that you, the developers, or the PMs, or the people who just know what you're doing with GA because they made you implement it, are not forced to answer these questions over and over about, what is this data actually telling me? And then we went over some of the common questions, and I'm happy to take more questions now. I'm supposed to give you this catch box. Do we have any questions? It can be a specific challenge that you're facing, and I'll ask you a series of questions before I can answer. Yeah? I'm going to toss this to you, and then you give it back to her.
My main question is, wow, this is magic. I have these Facebook problems, and social media, it's really important to us. And when it comes to the acquisition area, I just see, and it's like Facebook mobile, Facebook referral, Facebook pay ads, and I would like to put all in the same bucket, and then I can see, to split the things that I want. Is that possible?
Yes.
I want to put all in the same bucket.
Yes. So you have 2 options here. So the best option, I would say, for you is what we call channel groupings. So we talked a lot about attribution, and source medium is where they came from and how they came in. That's a pretty granular thing. Every session has one source medium. If you want all of these source mediums, they come in various ways because some of them are mobile, some of them are referrals, some of them are Facebook ads. You want them all in one bucket. Your best bet is what we call a channel. You can define a channel to be just the Facebook channel. So you would say, channel, Facebook. The rule is source contains Facebook. And any time that the source contains Facebook, that traffic gets put into that channel. From there, you look at the channels report, not the source medium report, and it's been put into a bucket. So a channel is like a layer on top of the source medium. So the channels are defined. We give you default channels that we define in we have a series of rules that we think are good. You can modify them or create a custom one. That is all a configuration that you do inside the Google Analytics interface. So you go into admin, there'll be channels options on the right. Cool. Do we have another question? Any other questions? We got stairs on the side, black shirt. Oh, we could do here first, that's fine, yeah.
Hi. Well, my question is regarding all the visits from Google Organic. Mm-hmm. Because a few years ago, there was a change, and we can't see the origin anymore, like the keywords, right?
Can't see the keywords anymore, that's correct.
And now there is this other tool that we can use to have, it's a separate tool from Google. It's called Webmaster Tools, right? And now it changed
Search
the name.
Console. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to know how accurate are the information that comes from this tool, because in the beginning I had the impression it was kind of like an overview of the data, like all the numbers were like 100 or 1,000, and now I have the impression it's more accurate. So I wanted to know, did it change along the way, and how accurate is that related to the origins we had before directly on analytics?
Yeah, so those are two different things. What Google Analytics used to provide is the keyword that someone searched for before they clicked through and came to your website. So it was the session on your site. It used to provide you the keyword that they searched for on organic. That no longer happens because searches are now encrypted. So you'll usually see that the session from organic comes from a not provided keyword or a not set keyword. So that was telling you where your actual sessions came from a keyword level. Search Console doesn't care about what happened on your website. Search Console only cares about your website's performance on Google search. So it will tell you how many impressions you had for a certain keyword and how many click-throughs you had for a certain keyword. It doesn't go to the part where they actually get to your website and they do stuff. It just cares about your performance on this Google search page. I do believe that it is rounded. I don't think you're going to see like 123. You'll probably see 125 or 150. It's rounded for ease, because by being rounded, it can be it can be processed faster, it can be returned to you faster, it requires less back-end infrastructure. But they're still representative. So I would say that the best suggestion for you is you can look into the counting methodology for Search Console and get a specific answer on how are these numbers that I see counted. And then in terms of when they click on this keyword and then come to my website, that is a good representation of people clicking through, finding interest in your site for a certain keyword. So it should help you figure out the majority of where your organic search traffic is coming from is probably from the keywords you see in Search Console. It's just that they're not tied the same way that they used to be. As an aside, you can also link Google Analytics to Search Console and get your Search Console reports inside of GA. They're still the Search Console reports, it's still that counting methodology, but now it's a little bit easier because it's available to you inside of Google Analytics.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome. Right after him, we'll come back down to you.
That's the question about the goals. It looks like it's like a logical system, like true or false. Either you completed the goal or you didn't. Can you include ands and ors? Like the person is from a certain sector and he did this event after this event, and that event, or he did another path? Not
easily. So you can do that in 2 ways. So his question is, can I choose when to fire this goal? Can I only fire it for like a subset of users when they do certain things? It's a good question. It comes up a lot. The answer is yes and no. So yes, in the sense that if you are sophisticated enough to keep track of all those things, and then at the end, only send the event that is going to match out to the goal, only send that when your criteria are met, that's one way to do it. That's like a custom solution that you would keep track of all these pieces, and then you would make the decision, should I fire this event such that it increments this particular goal? You cannot build that logic into the goal definition itself. However, you could also just fire the goal for everyone and then build a segment in Google Analytics for the criteria you care about. So you have goals for all your people, and then you have a segment, they did this, 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 and this, because there are sequences. You can build sequences into an advanced segment. And then look at goal completions for just that segment. That's another way that you could solve it if you don't have the capability of making decisions logic on your end of when to fire that event.
Okay, so if you can manage to do a sequence of logic sequence through the events, it's better to go through the events and then a specific event will fire the goal or not? Mm-hmm.
Yep, because with event tracking, you decide when to fire it. If you're using GTM, you use what we call a trigger. So you decide when that trigger sends the event hit. So if you have the sophistication to have really advanced signals for when should this event fire or not, you have a lot of power on when data gets into Google Analytics. If you don't have that sophistication, what you can do is track all those steps leading up to it as their own event maybe, and then use a Google Analytics sequence to kind of help with that logic of did they do these things and then get to the goal at the end.
To start off, it would be easier to sequence, and if it makes sense, then you go.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had a question over here in the front. If we could pass the chat bot over. Catchbox. Why do I keep calling it a chat bot? Whoopa. Nice.
Almost. Can you tell us more about 360 suite?
The 360 suite.
And the difference?
Yeah, there's a big difference. Has anybody ever seen sampled data in their Google Analytics account? Couple times? Okay. As you grow, you're going to see more and more of it. The biggest difference between Google Analytics 360 and Google Analytics Standard, the one that people care about the most, is sampling. So sampling is this process where you have more than 500,000 sessions, and so we're going to take a sample of them, like, let's say you have 1 million sessions. We're going to take 500,000 and extrapolate based on those 500,000 to return the report that you're looking at. So you would see an alert in the top right that says this report is based on 50% of sessions. A lot of companies don't like that, which I understand. It is a pretty good process in terms of the algorithm behind it of returning representative data. But when you get really narrow into like, I want to look at this one user and this event that they did, and I want to get really specific, sampling can really give you some weird results because it's not like a normal distribution of traffic. So you would if you upgrade to Google Analytics 360, you have access to unsampled data both in the interface and through the API. You also have access to ads integrations that otherwise you cannot use. So if you use DoubleClick for like digital and display advertising, right now there's no integration between DoubleClick and the standard version of Google Analytics, but there is for the paid version. And then the other thing that comes up the most frequently is custom funnels. These are available in Google Analytics 360, where you can decide, I want to look at the drop-off between step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And it gives you a funnel report. It's a type of custom report. That's available in the 360 product. And it's not available in the free product, which means you have to like use a sequence-based segment where you do 4 steps and 5 steps and compare them to try and figure out how many dropped off between step 4 and step 5. You have to kind of work around the fact that there's no report that you can build that shows you like drop-offs between a specific flow that you care about. Any other questions? Yeah, right here. Uh-oh. Earlier, he was like, oh, technical, great. I'm just going to have a really technical question.
Oh, no, I have a very easy question, I think.
Yes.
You mentioned very briefly that filtering can irreversibly damage your data.
Yes.
Why is that?
So filters, when you put a filter on your view, you're often including certain traffic or excluding certain traffic, or modifying it. But usually the include and exclude are the most damaging. And the reason I say that is a lot of people just decide to put these filters on without testing them first. And like they don't know how to write a regex, but they just wrote it, and then it doesn't match out to any traffic. So they're like, oh, include traffic to the host name, regex something, but none of their traffic matches that host name. So now all traffic is being excluded because it doesn't match the filter. And now you're missing as many days of data as it took you to figure out that your filter was bad in the first place. So that's why you would normally have your test view, which doesn't have any filters on it. You're going to put a filter on it and see how it works, see how it impacts your data. Does it accidentally kick doesn't let anything through? Or does it include too much or exclude too much before you put that filter onto your actual master view? Question over here. Right here, next to you.
Considering that sites are built nowadays to conduct clients to have less clicks until they are converted or buy, what kinds of hit we should use, considering that I don't know, page view I can understand completely works, but if we have less clicks, what kinds of hit can we construct?
So I would still send, if your page is not refreshing as the user goes, I would send event hits for every time that they are either doing something on the page that you care about or proceeding to the next page. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you've got one page, a single checkout or something like that, that requires them to input a whole bunch of information. If you're trying to figure out whether people are doing it or if they see it and they get halfway through and then they hit a problem, you probably need to send an event whenever they successfully complete all these fields. So yeah, you're tracking a lot and it's all in one page, but it will allow you to see their interaction with all of the fields. Or if each field was in its own page, then you could just track the pages. So it all depends on your site and the questions you're trying to answer. Yep. More questions? More questions? Anyone? Does anyone have a really hard problem that they're trying to solve? Because one of the answers that I often have to give is that that's not possible. So I'm happy to give that answer. It's always helpful to at least know that something's not possible. Yeah? Do you want to pass it here?
Talking about the double-click suite, I see some big clients moving their attribution to DCM, which is the double-click ad server, because DCM has the view before the clicks, right? So since DCM serves the display ads, DCM can know a piece of the attribution that analytics doesn't know, basically. So you have everything the analytics has on the attribution path, plus the before the click fill. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I've seen at least 3 or 4 cases of big companies saying, hey, I'm going to move my attribution to DCM, which is still Google, but they're moving away from analytics.
Right. So those are that's 2 questions in one. So one question is understanding a user's interaction with you as a brand before they come to your website. That's one question. And the other is, how do you attribute a later goal or conversion back in light of those 2 things? So the 2 things are an impression, so a view of your ad, and a click. It really comes down to those 2 things. So DCM keeps track of, did someone view your ad and did they click your ad before they later converted? Google Analytics only has access to the people who came to your site and where they came from most recently. That's its default attribution model. It's this last non-direct click, is what it's called. So it's all based on clicks. It wouldn't attribute a session back to a view of an ad. It wouldn't attribute a goal back to a view of an ad. So if you use the DCM integration, GA can start doing that for you. it can look at ad views.
360 only,
Yes. However, if you use AdWords, if you use AdWords and you use the Google Display Network, you can enable view-through reporting in the multi-channel funnels report in Google Analytics, such that an ad view of your AdWords ad on the Google Display Network is considered in the path to conversion as a touch point instead of it just being clicks. So I would say DCM and DBM have a lot of double-click campaign manager, double-click bid manager. They're good for display advertising, particularly for robust, like if you need a lot of robust tools. But I don't think that everyone should just decide like, oh, we have to move to double-click because we're trying to get view-through information into analytics from AdWords as well.
Okay, I think I have a hard ball for you, although not really technical.
Okay.
What Mixpanel can do that GA cannot do?
Yeah, so Mixpanel, see that's really unfair because I told you at the beginning that I don't know anything about other products. I do know a little bit about Mixpanel. Mixpanel is basically all interaction based. It's all events, so far as I know, which means it's actually kind of similar to Firebase Analytics, which I don't know a lot about either. However, one thing that I think that Mixpanel allows you to do a little bit better is pathing through your site or through your app. Google Analytics has always struggled with this. As I mentioned before, the funnels that I mentioned are only available in the 360 version. We have these flow reports that show you how users are flowing through your site, but they are often heavily sampled. You can't really customize them, and so they have a limit to how many questions they can answer. If I'm not mistaken, Mixpanel does allow you to build reports in such a way that you can easily understand users' paths, or more easily than you might be able to do in Google Analytics. But I think that the way that they process like into sessions might be different. So I don't necessarily know if it's better or worse. I had a meeting with a startup in New York. I used to do like consulting with startups through a program we have in the States. And we went on site and kind of talked about GA. And they were using Mixpanel originally. And I should remember exactly what it was that was falling short. But they kept Mixpanel for a while they implemented Google Analytics. They looked at the two to decide which one could give them better insights. They ended up just signing for Google Analytics 360 because they wanted the most robust measurement product for the most fair price, which is that's where they landed, because they were paying for Mixpanel originally already. I can only guess that it had something to do with the multi-channel funnels and the attribution aspects and the way that we sessionize, even though Mixpanel is better for single interactions and pathing, is what I would say. Okay. I will do one more question if anyone has it, and if not, we can wrap up. We got one more. You guys are all stuck here. Watch, it's going to be like some crazy, how do you deal with fake news question. It's not related to anything.
It's a business question.
Okay.
How to choose a good professional that can help you when you don't know nothing about the topic. What should I ask him to figure out if he's a good professional and that he can help me?
Really good question. So how do I choose a professional to help me with Google Analytics? So we do have what we call a Google Analytics Certified Partner Program. So to start, I would limit your search to just that program as much as you can. Because those people go through a series of tests and a series of like upkeep to make sure that there's still what we can endorse as a partner. We have a whole team that manages them on the Google side. Within them, let's say you're already in the scope of just GACPs, I think that they all are going to have similar skills, but there might be certain things that they can do better than others, and I would ask them to tell you specifically what they can deliver that someone else couldn't, almost like an interview. And honestly, it's going to be hard for you to know whether they're lying to you or not, but you can always ask for materials of what they've done with other clients or case studies, other clients that they work with and what insights they've been able to deliver. The most challenging technical problem that they've been able to solve and the most challenging one that they haven't been able to solve. And almost the same way as you would interview a candidate, ask them to tell you where they're good and where they aren't good, so that you have an idea of what can they say, what can they do for me, what can they say they can do for me, and what evidence can I get that they're not lying, basically. Is that good? Is that enough? Okay. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and I'll stick around for questions.